There can be little doubt, I think, that the two 19th century philosophers who have had the widest influence outside philosophy are Marx and Nietzsche. In continental Europe especially, the influence of Nietzsche on philosophers since his day has been prodigious. But he's also influenced creative writers, including some of the most eminent in the English language. For instance, Bernard Shaw, W.B. Yeats, and D.H. Lawrence. The quality of his own prose is simply dazzling and is second to nobody's. Friedrich Nietzsche was born in Saxony in 1844. He had an academic career of extraordinary brilliance as a classic scholar and became a full professor in his mid-20s, an almost unheard-of thing. But then he threw over his university career, went into isolation and became a philosopher. For 16 years he poured out his writings, mostly either short books or books of essays and aphorisms. Some of the best-known titles are The Birth of Tragedy, Human All Too Human, The Gay Science, Beyond Good and Evil, and, most famous of all, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. At first he was deeply influenced by the ideas of Schopenhauer and Wagner, but he rebelled against both and went on to produce some notorious anti-Wagner polemics. Until the last 4 years of his creative life, he made no attempt to build a system of any kind. But then he began to think of drawing all his main themes together into one single comprehensive work, first to be called The Will to Power, then The Revaluation of All Values. But it was not to be. Always plagued by ill health, in January 1889 he collapsed into mental illness, a condition almost certainly caused by tertiary syphilis, and he was helplessly insane until his death in 1900. With me to discuss his work is J.P. Stern, Professor of German in the University of London and author of one of the best-known of the many books on Nietzsche. Professor Stern, I think one can say that Nietzsche was the first philosopher really to face up to Western man's loss of faith in religion, loss of belief in God or in the existence of any world outside this one. And if there's no God and no transcendental world, then all values, all truth, rationality, standards of any kind are not given to man from some agency outside himself, but are created by man, presumably for his own needs. We choose our values, or at least we create our values. Now, this is an extraordinarily disruptive and disturbing thing to confront, and Nietzsche knew that. Can we start the story from there?
Yes, I think that this is a perfectly fair way of starting. In addition to what you said about his life, I think one might mention that he was a son of a man's, that he himself had, his father was a minister of the Lutheran Church, and therefore his attack on Christianity is not a neutral, not a disinterested, not a pacific thing at all, but is violent, dramatic, melodramatic in many ways. It's an attack on Christianity rather than on Christ. And I think the point that you made, that he envisages 19th century man to have to stand on his own feet without the support of faith or dogma of any kind, is central, is a central kind of starting point to his philosophy. I think we want to see him as somebody who does not simply profess a flat kind of atheism, but who is personally, intimately involved in the denial of divine justice and divine mercy and all that.
But this Nietzschean starting point did launch him, didn't it, into a revaluation of all values,
yes.
to use the title of his book. I mean,
yes.
One thing he was saying was that, in a way, we are basing our lives on false premises because we adopt attitudes and values and standards which, when we actually examine the premises of them, we reject those premises, the old traditional premises.
What he believed in, what he tried to show, was that the whole edifice, both of Christian values and of idealism, which he saw derivative from those values, was false, had to be thrown over, and something else to be put in its stead. The question as to what was to be put in its stead is not quite so simple, but that was the basic premise from which he began, and that, I think, makes for the melodrama, the extraordinary melodrama of the person, of the style, of the whole phenomenon of Nietzsche.
Now, this revaluation of all values is, of course, a colossal task, and I think it'll make our discussion of it clearer if we divide our consideration of it up a little bit.
Yes.
There are four main traditions within Western civilization to which Nietzsche addressed himself and which he attacked. The tradition of Christian morality, the tradition of secular morality, the herd values, as he called them, the ordinary morality of the mass of mankind, and some, at least, of the traditions deriving from ancient Greece, particularly
that's right,
from Socrates. Now, let's have a look at each of those four in turn. Can you say a little bit more about his fundamental criticism of Christian values?
Well, I think to say, to start with, on the Christian, I think the attack is a very simple one, a very straightforward one. All the positive values of Christianity, turning the other cheek, loving your neighbor as you love yourself, having compassion for those suffering, all these are ruled out of court. Now, not absolutely, because, as we shall see later, I think, I want to make that point very clearly, Nietzsche is constantly making special rules for special people, and he is very much against the notion of generalizing simply rules in the way in which Kant had done in the categorical imperative. So, yes, the first thing, then, is the attack not on Christ, but on Christianity as really furthering the underdog, furthering the person who cannot stand on his own feet and requires compassion, requires pity, illicitly requires sympathy from the outside.
But why was he against compassion and against pity? Why did he despise those so much?
He's not against them. He does not despise them when they come from the strong person. What he despises is the support of the weak person from outside himself. Whatever that source is, the outside source may be, whether it's another person, his compassion, or rules or regulations, laws, or whatever.
And the reason for being against this was what?
The reason for being against it was his fundamental appeal is to authenticity, to selfhood, to the elan vital, to the life within the person lived to the full.
Yeah. Now, what about his criticism of secular morality? I mean, the great moral philosophers like Kant, or in his own day, the utilitarians and so on, that wasn't Christian morality quite, but he was against that too.
Yes.
Now, why?
I think the main reason there is this, that all systems of secular moralities are based on an abstraction from the individual case. They're based on an appeal to a generality. For Nietzsche, the word general is the same as common, and by common he means common in the nasty sense of the word. And therefore, in a sense, all rules and regulations, one might almost go as far as saying all laws, are for him matters for the common herd and no more. And now we're, of course, already on the third point that you made, the point about the common herd.
Yeah.
He's most emphatically not a democratic philosopher. He's a philosopher of the great and the noble people, the heroic kind of philosophy, and therefore for him the appeal of democratic ideology is very, very low indeed.
He thought that the noble man, the great man, the hero, should be a law unto himself and shouldn't be hamstrung by
precisely.
the petty rules and regulations and so on.
That's the best phrase you can use, a law unto himself.
Yes.
It's not the sentence he used, but it's very, very precise what he meant.
Now, what about the last of the four traditions that I mentioned, that of ancient Greece? It's worth remembering in this context that he did start adult life as a classic scholar, a professor of classics. He knew about ancient Greece and became deeply critical, didn't he, of the whole tradition deriving from Socrates.
Yes, but his classical work, and I think it's one of the most remarkable works ever written on the whole problem of tragedy, is concerned with pre-Socratic Greece, with pre-Socratic tragedy, which for him is a kind of golden age. And the whole thing goes flat at the point when Euripides, Aristophanes, and Socrates come on the scene. What happens there is that strength and goodwill and warmth and beauty are replaced by reason, are replaced by rationalizing things, by the Socratic argy-bargy. He never forgave Plato, so to speak, for bringing up a hero whose main qualities are those of talking everybody else into the ground.